It's March Madness time. Well, have some Red Bull, some coffee.
It's a perfect way to show how crazy these past couple of months have been.
They are the big contenders for the tournament. Haven't lost a game yet. I like Arizona.
Arizona's a good team, a tall team, a fast team.
Incredibly stacked conference, the SEC.
Baylor won the game, and that's a 18-year promise, like you said. And Scott Drew, that's an incredible story for him. And
I just feel there's going to be a big upset, and
so yeah, I think it's an easy pick.
Hi, this is Andrew Utz, the winner of the Outsiders Opinions inaugural Bracket Challenge, and you're listening to Kevin and Austin.
What's up, y'all? Welcome to our men's college basketball opinions of the week. It is March, but is it truly March Madness? I don't know, but I am joined by March Madness expert as we're getting ready for the top 25. We did this last time, and we got a lot of engagement. We're looking forward to it, and we, of course, are joined by the third member, but a man that has an ever-changing title. This time he's three-time champ three-time champ Jeopardy. His latest win coming off March Madness Jeopardy. Make sure to check out that video dropped yesterday. Austin.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. It was a fun Jeopardy video. I don't think you got a question in, but it was fun between Jake and I to see who could know the most about college basketball. It was close, but this is a very different top 25. We have a good bit of new teams in that are being mentioned, and a lot of teams went up really much further or dropped a lot further because of games that were played these last 2 weeks. Our honorable mentions right now at the bottom of it, at technically speaking 30, would be South Carolina, and then Florida, St. Mary's, Boise State, and New Mexico. Jake, what do you think about those teams?
I think these are all pretty sneaky teams. Boise State's been on a little bit of a tear. What have they won? 5 of the last 6, Austin?
Yes.
Yeah, they've won 5 of the last 6. They're pretty good. They got a solid lineup of guys who are going to put their hearts out on the floor. New Mexico, my beloved, had to drop because I needed to accept the fact that they've lost a couple games recently. And St. Mary's had to drop based on their recent losses. And that loss to Gonzaga was brutal. Florida is one of the best rebounding teams in the nation, and South Carolina has a good defense. So these are all teams that still deserve a little bit of recognition for what they've been able to do up until this point.
Yeah, they're all good teams. New Mexico and St. Mary's is tough to see them drop, but we could see them move back in before the tournament starts.
Oh, absolutely.
And now I think that means we can go into the top 25. So we'll go 25 to 20 as we got some new faces and also some teams that dropped. So first, the team that dropped was AFAU by 1 at 25. 24, you got Texas Tech. They were previously at 18, so they dropped 6. 23, Colorado State dropped 8 spots and fell to 23. Gonzaga is new at 22. And then 21, you have South Florida. And let's just stop there. And Jake, what are your thoughts on these 4 teams?
So FAU we wanted to keep, even though they had a recent loss. But we know that they're a good team. They brought everybody back from their last Final Four run. And so they're still a really good team. And so we wanted to keep them in that top 25 because we do think they are a top 25 team in the nation. Texas Tech, we dropped, but didn't drop completely because we still believe in their team when they're fully healthy. Austin, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, Warren Washington is a dominant center for them. We saw how he played against Hunter Dickinson in Kansas, and Kansas obviously lost that game because of how Hunter Dickinson played. But without Warren Washington, I'm kind of off for them because they seem to rely too heavily. I mean, they always rely too heavily on Pop Isaacs, but they don't have that defensive presence. Darian Williams can only do so much defensively to help them out. But when they are fully healthy, I definitely think that they're a top 25 team in the nation.
So I wanted to keep them in because they deserve that recognition because they could be sneaky come March. And when their whole squad is healthy, they are a tough team to beat. We dropped Colorado State because they've had a string of 3 straight losses that were tough against 3 really good teams, mind you. But we wanted to keep them in and not drop them from the 25 completely because we believe in their team. We believe in their hustle. We believe in Isaiah Stevens. But we did want to recognize South Florida and Gonzaga over them because of their recent successes. Austin, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, when you think of everything that's happened with this conference, the Mountain West, it's just kind of remarkable how much better teams have played. And then going on to Gonzaga, they dominated through Ryan Nimhard and EK by just overpowering a St. Mary's team that was supposed to be very good on defense. But when they cannot score, when they cannot contribute consistently, they only have 6 guys. You're not going to bring a guy off the bench to fire your team up that can give you some quick points. It's really just the guys that they have who start and then one bench guy. And when they are so reliant on their defense, when they can't score, it really does stifle them. And Gonzaga, this is their second time playing. They'll obviously play again in WCC championship most likely. And Nimhard was amazing. EK was amazing. And the starting lineup has a lot of experience. You said it before we recorded that they were overhated. And I definitely can see that sentiment.
Yeah, Gonzaga has lost one game since January 18th, and that was a 2-point loss to St. Mary's. They're on a tear. And even before that, they played pretty closely against Purdue for a while. They played pretty close against San Diego State, which we know, y'all know how we feel about San Diego State. But since January, they've been completely obliterating their opponents by double digits in almost every game. And so Gonzaga needs a little bit of respect, and they're starting to get it in the AP poll. But they also just went into Kentucky and beat them, which is a tough environment. And so they definitely deserve the recognition to be at 22. And South Florida is just, they're good. They're just good. It's hard to describe why South Florida is good. Well, it's not different. It's not necessarily hard to describe, but it's just they're playing well and they deserve the spot because they are on a 15 game win streak, and that includes a win over Florida Atlantic and SMU, and Memphis. I think back when Memphis was weirdly ranked at number 10. But South Florida has been getting it done, and they got Youngblood, they got Pryor, they got Miguel, they got Knox, they got guys who can put it down on the floor and score some points, and they play a tight defense. So we wanted to give South Florida a little bit of recognition here.
All right, and that now we enter 20, where a team that stays is Purdue. Then we'll move up a little. Just name a few more teams. You got Alabama; they fell 11 spots. Nevada is new, and then Utah State. You got 2 new teams in this, moving up to the 15. But I'll toss it over to Austin to give his thoughts on these teams.
Purdue needed a miraculous, almost 3-point performance to even be a very bad defensive team in Illinois. And that is why they stayed at 20. They won some games and definitely had some good performances, but the Big Ten is just not what we think of when we think of a dominant conference, and their ability to beat teams that we're not that excited about won't move them up on any list. Alabama, they can only really win one way, and that's fast-paced and high-efficient shooting. And when they're not scoring, their fast-paced offense allows for defensive breakdowns in the fast break, and it allows a lot of teams to put up literally 100 points, which is very, very much for college basketball, and that's why they dropped so far.
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Austin said. I mean, obviously because we created this list together, but Purdue needed to stay because they still have not impressed us. They're not going to be able to consistently shoot from 50% from 3 to beat lackluster defensive teams like Illinois. They only won by 6 when I thought Purdue was way better than Illinois, and I still don't think Purdue's that amazing, but that's how low I was on Illinois. And to see them only win by 6, I mean, yes, they had to go to Illinois, which is tough, but to only win by 6, and Edie had to put up 28, and they had to shoot 50% from 3, and Illinois didn't even play that well. They only had one guy hit more than 1 3, and so I don't know. Purdue just needed to stay. They didn't need to go down, but they needed to stay right at 20 because their defense is very lackluster. The entire Big Ten, we talked about it already, is very lackluster. So Purdue needed to stay, and Alabama needed to drop because they have a string of really bad wins where they gave up 100 points to two of the teams. That includes Florida and Kentucky. They did have a close game against Tennessee, but when you give up over 100 points in 2 of 4 games, you need to go down. And they lost 3 of the last 4. And like Austin said, they rely too heavily on their offense. But to move on to the 18th and 17th seeds, we brought in Nevada and Utah State because they each have been really, really, turning it into a new gear. Utah State has oddly been one of the more consistent teams this year. They started out very strong it was a little bit of a weak non-con schedule, but they've only had one string where they've lost back-to-back games. They've always been able to bounce back. They just beat San Diego State. Austin, do you want to talk more about Utah State?
Yeah, they play the right way, and that's extremely important. They lost so many players this last season, but their head coach Danny Sprinkle came in from Montana State, which made the tournament the past 2 years, and has instilled a defense first, but still good at offense team that is has 4 scores above 11 points per game. Gray Osborne is amazing, averaging 7.5 and 9. They're efficient, and the Mountain West is so good that them being number one in the conference is extremely impressive.
Yeah, and we wanted to also bring Nevada in at the 18 spot right behind Utah State because Nevada has been really proving themselves lately. They've only lost 1 game since the beginning of February, and they beat Utah State in Utah State. They beat San Diego State in overtime. They beat UNLV, one of the better teams in the Mountain West apparently, and then they just beat Colorado State and Boise State in away games. They were the away team. And so Nevada with Jared Lucas and Davidson and Blackshear, they got a good squad. And McIntosh just went off for 25 or something in the game against Boise State. And so Nevada they've earned their stripes, and we wanted to put them right at the 18th spot.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good place.
And 17, once again, is Utah State. Now we move into 16, which is Washington State that fell 5, Marquette that moved up 2 spots, and then Auburn that went up 8 spots. And then you have Arizona where they were at 13 in our last list. So we'll go back to Jake for some more thoughts on those teams.
So Washington State, we were really high on them in the last video, and we still, for the record, we still like Washington State. But recently, they've had a couple bad losses. They lost to Arizona State, and they lost to Washington. Now, Washington has good players, but they've never been able to put it together, really. But in this stage of the season, in this time, you can't be losing games you need to win. And we were high on Washington State after they went into Arizona and beat them, but they've scraped by USC at home. They were at home against USC and scraped by them, and so Washington State needs to get back to their gear. We're not completely out on them, but that we felt like they needed to drop a little bit because of the performances the way they've been performing recently. We moved Marquette up 2 spots, even though we're still hesitant on Marquette. We wanted to move them up a little bit because they did play interestingly well against UConn without Tyler Kolek. And while I'm not the biggest Kolek believer, while it seems crazy that we're not Kolek believers, they seemed to move well without him, but they, I don't know, it was weird. They just looked more intense. They looked more prepared against UConn. Even though they lost, and they've lost 2 straight to UConn and Creighton. Those are tough matchups, and we wanted to not completely count Marquette out, but we still only wanted to move them up a little bit because we want to be a little hesitant. But then next we have Auburn and Arizona, and then Kansas. So Austin, do you want to talk about Auburn?
Yeah, Auburn's just such a good team when you consider the fact that they play. It's another team that plays the right way. They obviously beat South Carolina by 40, which is a team that we just had missing. They do have some questionable losses. Obviously, the big loss to Florida, where they lost by 26 in early February, was not good for them. But when they win big. Most of their wins come by over 10 points. Almost all of their wins come by over 10 points. The problem is they also lose big. They lost to Tennessee by 8 and then Kentucky by 11. But they still win big games when they need to. They play well against teams they need to beat, unlike some of these teams we mentioned before, like Washington State. They beat the teams they need to. And that's important come March, because if you're going to be matched up against a lower seed, you need to win those games.
Yeah, and Auburn, Janai Broom is a force on the inside, and they have a lot of guys who will play hard and play tough, and that's kind of the way that Bruce Pearl runs his team. That's kind of the coach he is, and that's why I really do like Bruce Pearl quite a bit. But then we had Arizona, and we're still hesitant on Arizona. Everything about Arizona is tempting. They have the numbers, they have the rebounds, they have the shooting, they have the defense, they have the guys, they have the names, they have the depth. We think maybe, but they're kind of like Texas Tech in the sense that when Caleb Love is off, he can shoot you out of a game. We still believe this ever since our last video. Um, they've won 4 straight, which are good, but those are games that they should have won, that they needed to win. And so we want to keep them in the same spot because we don't want to hype them up too much, but we don't want to take them down because they have earned the spot. And then at Kansas, we had to drop them 7 spots. And the reason we had to drop them 7 spots is because they're not winning. They lost to BYU at home. They lost to Baylor on the road, even though Baylor's a tough place to play. For some reason, it seems as though when you shut down Dickinson, you shut down the team. Austin, do you want to talk more about Kansas?
Yeah, they're a very heliocentric team, as you mentioned. Dickinson, as well as he plays, as well as the rest of the team plays. That's even with McCullough when he's healthy, averaging 19 points per game. And he's healthy now, and he's back, and he scored 19, or he scored 20 against Baylor, and they lost. But it's because Dickinson didn't play well. They're just not a deep team. They have 4 guys average 9 points or above. If you include DeJuan Harris, that's 8.5. So that's 5 guys. No one else averages over 5 points. So they're very heliocentric between McCullough and Dickinson. Those are their only true scorers. KJ Adams can also score at times, but their entire bench is just full of guys that are just energy defenders or energy rebounders. It's not really much of let's go get some points, even if you play 18 minutes a night like El Marco Jackson. So I'm not necessarily confident that they can, if they go against a high-scoring team, can you really get enough points out of Dickinson and McCullough?
But we also wanted to keep them in the top 15 because, like Austin mentioned, they have high-energy rebounders and high-energy defensive players. And so we think that those 5 guys, when they're on and they're playing well and fluidly, they're a good team and could win a couple games in March. And but as of right now, they don't look like that, and so we needed to drop them.
Now we go on to. Now we got a lot of moving pieces. We have a team that, of course, is the starlight of Austin, and to give a little bit more context, is y'all were debating about the team last year, and I read a fun article up from Ladie. Ladie said we were like, all right, that was last year's team. He said this year's team has to make its own destiny. There was some debate about last year's team and this year's team. Ladie is a huge part of that as he stepped up in his scoring. So, Austin, I wanted to ask you, why do you feel they're a better team now?
They have it's really close between last year and this year. And while I definitely think their offense is better, their defense is worse. But Ladie is so remarkable as a scorer, shooting 56% from the field, 39% from 3, 74% from the line. He grabs 8 rebounds per game. He averages over a steal per game. He contributes in so many different facets. This team is also better because they have multiple guys averaging over 9 points per game. That was not the case last year when you only had one guy averaging above 10, and that was Matt Bradley. And then you had Darian Chamella with 9.8, and those are the only two guys above 9 points. And the distribution of scoring was more even last year, but it was even and lower. So they're averaging 3.5 more points this year in a tougher conference. And I think that's partially why their record is worse this year, is because the NWC got better.
And then, Jake, why are they 4 spots lower?
They're 4 spots lower because they've lost. It's as simple as that. And while Austin thinks their offense is better, I don't hold that opinion because they can't seem to not be able to hit a three to save their life. But he is right in the sense that Jaden Ledee is a guy, and he's really, really good, and they still have a really good squad. But they lost to UNLV, and UNLV's tough. They lost to Utah State, and Utah State is tough. But they need to win these games. They were both on the road, but they're tough opponents, and so that's why we didn't drop them too far. But the questionable shooting for me is why I have dropped them, in my opinion, down a little bit. Because they're a fairly similar team. They rebound a little bit better, but the main difference between the teams from this year and last year is that they lost a bunch of role players and that they cannot hit a three to save their life. And I worry about that. And so that's why we dropped them. But at least when Austin and I were creating this list, we didn't have San Diego State at 11. We had put Kansas at 11 and Arizona at 12 and Auburn at 13. And then I was like, well, I still think San Diego State's better than Arizona. And then I thought about it. I was like, I still think they're better than Kansas. Because when I think about the way that their presence is on the court and the way that they play defense and the way that how fluid they are and the effort that they put into forcing turnovers and getting defensive stops, that's what makes them a good team. Not necessarily because they can hit a three, but because they will score when they need to. Like, if they need to score, you got guys who can get a bucket, and they will try their hardest to get these buckets. And so that's why dropping them only a little bit was warranted, because if you drop them too far, you're not giving them the respect that they deserve. And so putting them at 11, I think, was very fair. And they could very easily be a top 10 team in the nation still. But at 11 is where they need to sit right now, just for recent performance.
Speaking of top 10, we got Kentucky at 10. They move up 4 spots. Then you got BYU at +3. They went up 3 spots. And then Duke went up 1 spot. So we'll just talk about those teams. BYU had a double-digit lead against Iowa State with about 15 minutes left in the game, but they blew it. So, Austin, we'll go to you for your thoughts.
Well, I mean, losing that game, while you do want to win when you're up that many points, and it does suck for them, it's still Iowa State. And Jake and I are so high on that team that it does not affect our placement of BYU here. If they would have won, yes, it would have moved them higher, but it doesn't mean that we think of them any less because of where they are. We're very impressed with their defense, their resolve, their ability to even be in that position. They have 7 guys who average 9 or more points. Their scoring is so evenly spread that if you stop 1 or even 2 or even 3 of their guys, they still have a 10-point per game scorer that can go get you 20 points whenever you need it. So I think Jake and I both still trust them because of those reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I've been high on BYU for a while now. Austin can attest. And there was a time where they were kind of in a rough spot. They lost to Oklahoma, scraped by Kansas State and UCF, and then lost to Oklahoma State. And I was like, oh, maybe this isn't the team I thought they were. But I still believed in them. And then they went on to beat Baylor. They lost to Kansas State, but then they went on to beat Kansas and TCU. And the fact that they went into Iowa State, had a double-digit lead against a top 3 defensive team in the nation, is a big deal. Yes, they lost, but that's because that's because Iowa State's freaking good. And so BYU deserves a lot of respect because in a tough Big 12 conference, they've still been able to string out wins against good teams and even close losses against teams like Houston. And so BYU deserves all the flowers that they get, and we like this isn't necessarily like we mentioned in the first rankings video. This is where we think they are, not necessarily based on accolades or their standing, like their record, but it's what they're doing right now and the way we view them as a team as a whole. And this team moves very well. They have 7 or 8, 9 reliable scorers. They play really tight defense, and so that's why we moved them up because they played very well against one of the best teams in the nation. And but also we wanted to move Kentucky up to the 10. And why do we move Kentucky up? Because they're scoring like crazy with good defense. And they can hit their threes, they can rebound the ball, they can force turnovers. And they're also very protective of the ball. Like they don't necessarily like turn the ball over a lot at all either. And so they're very efficient from the field, and they're on a tear right now. They're winning games by a lot. They're scoring a lot of points. And while the Arkansas game gave us a little bit of a scare, they get to go in tomorrow at Tennessee and show what they're made of, and that's going to be a big matchup for them. But as of right now, they deserve to move up to the 4 spot, or move up 4 spots to the 10 spot. And then for Duke, Austin, what do you think about Duke?
Duke's just they're a talented team, and they always are. Usually at this time of year, they're young guys between Jared McCain and Caleb Foster, just good players. Then you obviously have the veterans in Roach, who are still contributing 14 points per game. Uh, Filipowski is still that guy. The only thing that's I think keeping them from being higher because they've won 8 of their last 9 games. It's just because of the ACC and the skill level that's there. We do have one other ACC team up here, but there wasn't another ACC team besides these top 2 that was even sniffing the top 30. So that's the only thing keeping them from a little bit higher.
Now we go to Creighton at 7 with +3. Then Baylor making the biggest jump with +15, moving to 6. And then you got UNC at +1. So who wants to go first?
Here, I can go. If we can talk about UNC first because we just talked about Duke. But UNC and Duke are very comparable, both obviously in the same conference. But they have those experienced guys like Baycott and RJ Davis. But you also have the young guys, Cadeau, who starts a fair amount of games. He is a good player for them. They obviously have Harrison Ingram now, who's just so athletic. They're a great rebounding team. They're 8th in the nation in rebounds. They have 2 guys averaging 9 rebounds or more per game. They're 25th in points. They score the rock incredibly, incredibly well. And RJ Davis is one of the best players in the country.
Yeah, UNC deserves all the praise that they currently get. They're like we've mentioned earlier, they're in a weak ACC, but Baycott's still the rebounder that he is. Ingram is a greater rebounder than we thought. And Davis is one of the best guards in the league, maybe the best. And he's able to lock down like a veteran would, like a senior would, and get them a point if they need to. And Cadeau's a good freshman, so putting them at the 5 was completely reasonable. And then the biggest jump was Baylor at the up to the 6th spot. We originally had Baylor way, way down at 21 because we were worried about their defense. They could score the rock like crazy. They could hit threes at like a 40% clip. Their field goal percentage was insane, but we worried that their defense would not be able to catch up. Well, it's caught up. They have turned on another gear on the defensive side of the ball. Austin, what did you observe?
It's remarkable what good coaching can do over the course of a season. They were very undisciplined to start the year defensively, and you could tell that they were a young team, and they are one of the youngest teams, maybe the youngest team of the teams that we have up here. When you think about the fact that they have 2 freshmen who are starting, that's rare when you consider how many teams go to the tournament. There's not many that have this amount of freshman help, but they still shoot 40% from 3. And recently, they've been so good on defense, and that is what you need come March. You can shoot all you want, but if you're going to give up a lot of points, it's not going to matter. And those impressive wins that they've had, they have 6 guys averaging 10.7 or more points. They're a deep team, 7 guys who play 15 or more minutes. It's just they're well-rounded, and again, great coaching by Scott Drew has really evolved this team into a true contender.
It's almost like with Baylor, because mind you, they've been playing the past 4 games without Langston Love, one of their key scorers and key players. And I'm gonna mind you, it's almost like they turned on a gear when he got hurt. It's almost like it's something that motivated them to start to perform, not necessarily for him, but to okay, we've lost a guy. We need to turn it in. We need to turn on another gear. And they did. They went into overtime against Houston and went pound for pound with them. They went into TCU and beat them. They beat Kansas, and now they've beaten Texas. And this is all without Langston Love. And it just seems like Austin said, that maybe coaching and motivation has pushed them into this higher gear that is exactly what you need at this time to succeed in March. They seem to be hitting their stride. They seem to be scoring the ball very well. And like we mentioned, their defense has really improved. They're playing tight. They're switching well. They're contesting shots very well. They're not committing too many fouls. And so Baylor deserved all the jump that they got. And Creighton at 7, they moved up only 3, but earlier in the year we were hesitant about Creighton, but we just need to sit down, take a step back and realize, okay, they're 6 of the last 7, including wins against UConn, Seton Hall, and Marquette. And in each of those games, they've had a new high scorer. They have guys putting up points every night. I'm looking at this list. Kalbrenner for 28. The next game, Trey Alexander for 26. The next game, Shireman for 27. Next game, Ashworth for 20. Alexander 31. Kalbrenner 23. Shireman 26. They are finding ways to consistently score the ball. And they're in a tough conference in the Big East. And so Creighton's become very, very scary, even though they lost Ryan Nemhard and Arthur Kaluma last year in the transfer portal. And so to see what they've done, especially recently, with their 3, 4 guys who are usually the most reliable scorers, they don't really have any other guys outside of their 4. And yet they still find ways to win. And it's not going to bring them a championship, but it's going to give them a couple wins. And so Creighton deserves the +3. What did you observe about Creighton, Austin?
Just their ability to overcome adversity. They're just a team that every time I think that, no, you know what, they're probably not going to go far this year, they seem to just push that aside, and they have fighters on their team. I know that you said if they brought Nimhard and some other guys back, they would have been one of your title contenders. And I think they're really, really trying to be a team that is up there. And they're doing it with impressive victories. They beat Seton Hall by 21. They beat Marquette by 14. And those are incredible wins, especially considering that their team is not necessarily deep. They play 6 guys, and all those guys play 20 or more minutes, but no one else plays even 10. So it really just is 6 guys every game doing all they can to get victories, but it doesn't matter because their 6 guys are so good. Again, you mentioned Shireman. He also had 16 rebounds that game, that he had 26 points, and that's just remarkable considering that they're going against good rebounding teams.
Yep, and now we go to the top 4. Let's see if anything moved. We got Tennessee at 4, Iowa State at 3, Houston at 2, UConn at 1, and if you were listening last time, that's what it was last time. This is not pre-recorded and not a drop. This is a new list. Why no movement here? Especially with Iowa State, as we talked about. They kind of flirted with a little bit of danger against BYU.
Nothing really necessitated movement. These are 4 teams that we all believe are true title contenders. They all have impressive facets about them, and even though there are scary moments, they win games, and that's what matters.
Yeah, these are the four most well-rounded teams in the nation, teams who can score and teams who also have really good defense. Houston and Iowa State have better defense than the other two, but Tennessee still has good defense, and UConn's UConn. They grind out wins and they have good defense and they play hard. And so we can't remove UConn from the number one spot because they're UConn and their offense is so high powered, and it's really hard to take the reigning champion away from the one spot after they've still consistently been able to win games. Yes, they lost recently to Creighton, and they had to Marquette without Tyler Kolek play close against them, but we still think that they may be the best team in the nation, um, and they haven't had a bad loss. Um, Houston needs to stay at 2 because they are the best defensive team in the nation, and they find ways to win. Austin, I know you like Houston. Tell me more about them.
They're still one of the best defensive teams I've ever seen during the regular season, and they're doing it in a new conference against new opponents, and it doesn't matter. It just seems like the system that Ralph Sampson has put in, or Craig Sampson. Is it Craig Sampson? Let me find it.
It's not Craig Sampson.
It's Craig. What is it?
Kelvin.
Kelvin Sampson. Sampson. I knew it was Sampson. I just couldn't think of the
You were close.
first name. Yeah, I was
Those
close.
basketball coaches are tough.
Yeah, it is very tough. But their defensive rating of 88.5, I haven't seen one that low in a long, long, long time. There's outscoring teams by almost 20 points per game. And again, they're playing in one of the best, if not the best conferences in college basketball. Probably the best. Almost certainly the best. LJ Cryer is still averaging 16. The only thing that kind of worries me is when this team does give up points, can they outscore? But it doesn't usually matter.
Yeah, I've always been hesitant about their offense, but they did bring in LJ Cryer and he can score. Jamal Shed is good. They have guys, Jawan Roberts, and he's a boards machine. And so, I mean, I like Houston, but I also like Iowa State. And Austin can attest that Iowa State is my favorite team in the nation right now because I think they have the defense to win as well as the ability to score. They have Curtis Jones, they have Robert Jones, they have Keyshawn Gilbert, Taman Lipsey, they got Trey King, and they got Hassan Ward. These are all names that are reliable scorers as well as reliable defensive players on both ends of the ball. And so both ends of the court, both sides of the ball, whatever the phrase is. And this Iowa State team is I feel the same way about the UConn team last year. They just play so hard and they play so tight and so tough that you can't take them out of the top 4 because even though they had a scare against BYU, they found a way to win. They played tough and started scoring and turned into a better team than they were that first half. And they seem to always be able to go into that huddle at the half and turn on another gear and then become the best team you might see in the whole nation. And so Iowa State deserves to stay at the 3, and at the 4 we brought in Tennessee. I know Austin likes Tennessee a lot, so I'll let him talk about Dalton Connect.
I just there's not many players who can compare to him, and the fact that they have such a great defense around him, it's very well. Ladie's definitely a better defender. It's very much like San Diego State, and the fact that they have such a great defense around their star players, that it allows them to be okay with that player at times taking a possession off. And that's kind of the problem with Kansas. Is there cannot be a possession off with Hunter Dickinson or Calvin McCullough. But with Tennessee, their defense is so good that they can. And between Adu and Ziegler, who Ziegler's playing much better than he did last year, and he's playing much better recently. Vescovi's starting to come around a little bit, but I mean, his last game he only had 2 points against South Carolina, but it didn't matter because they're winning almost every game at this point. And I definitely think they deserve to be a 1 seed.
Yeah, Tennessee, they moved up to the 1 seed in the bracketology, and it's well deserved. They got role players up and down the board, and they got stars. They have Connect, Adu, Ziegler, Josiah Jordan-James, Jordan Gainey, Vescovi, Awaka, and Meshack. These are all guys who are very reliable that you put on the court and you go, okay, I don't need to worry about them making a stupid mistake. And some of them may not necessarily be able to like put them with the ball in their hands and get you a bucket immediately, but they play hard and they play smart and they make good cuts and they set good screens. And the defense, like Austin said, is really it's a tough defense. And so we feel like these 1 through 4 didn't warrant any changing because they've been so consistent. And so why put Houston over UConn when we still see UConn as the same team, and we still see Houston as the same team, and Iowa State and Tennessee. And so while we have differences, while Austin may believe Tennessee's better than Iowa State, or I believe Iowa State's better than Houston, we think this is fair for what the overall scope is for these 4 teams, from history from last year, from personnel this year, performance this year, and what we think they'll do in the future. And so we think that these 4 are here to stay.
Yeah, let us know your thoughts. We appreciate you listening. And once again, make sure you're on the socials, as we're doing a lot this March. And this top 25 will be on our Instagram, _podcast 20. I believe that. You can also search up Outsiders Opinions. Been putting a lot on there. But, I'm a loser. And since we had number 1 as reigning champ, how about our reigning champ for Jeopardy? Make sure you check out that video to see how he won. Austin, close out the video.
Yeah, thank you guys for listening. Where would you have these teams? Who else would you have in your top 25? And please catch us in our next video.